Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Quads Get Gold, where we try to bring you the world and the country 1 hour at a time from people who actually know what they're talking about, and for a little bit longer than the 10-second snippets you usually get on interviews. Today I have back with us John Wohlstetter. He's a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute and at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. His primary areas of expertise are national security and foreign policy, and the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, as some viewers may recall from our last show with him. He is the author of Sleepwalking with the Bomb and The Long War Ahead and the Short War Upon Us. And he is, I should say, a most prolific writer with articles in newspapers, magazines, and blogs that would take a lifetime to read. I know, because I try to read them and I can barely keep up. And numerous appearances in radio and TV. And let me bring him on the screen first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about today's show. In the meantime, please remember we are producing these shows as a means of raising awareness for the Gold Institute for International Strategy, and would very much appreciate your tax-deductible donations, at least to the extent that the IRS will permit. And the link for those donations will appear on screen from time to time, and if you miss it, is right there underneath this screen in the description. So please feel free to contribute to the program through YouTube or Odyssey, as the case may be, but there's always that link to make sure that the Institute can keep on going. So, without further ado, hello, John. How are you doing?
Fine, so
Welcome back.
great to be with you
I
again.
I hope I didn't take too long over there, but
Oh,
here we are. Now, last time we met on this venue, we discussed the implications of the 25th Amendment. And I think it was one of the most instructive videos we had. And today, however, is a different subject altogether. And we're going to be discussing the USS Titanic and whether it has already hidden an iceberg or we still have time. And of course, I'm referring to an article that you wrote on the 2022 elections. Why don't you bring us into the subject?
let me do that, Saul, but first let me say what you said about the 25th Amendment. There is some relationship between my surprise at the 2022 result and many others and the condition of our president. The fact is that a lot of respondents know that he's not 100% physically or mentally. And this normally would be a huge factor in such an election. And a pretty decent share of those people probably know that he has the ultimate insurance policy in Kamala Harris, who may be the one person in Washington that the entire party, both of membership, both parties agree they do not want her to be president. But that said, I think that in looking at this election, the reason I'm so pessimistic as is because I think that the voters missed what this opportunity was about. This is something I haven't seen much in the commentary. If you have president who is as far underwater as Biden is on every issue except abortion, and maybe less than he would normally be on immigration because voters, uh, many of them thought that there were less than 1 million people that came to America in the first 2 years, and there were from 5 to 6 million. And that might have made him feel more strongly about the issue. But on everything else, he was underwater by lots of points, overall by about 20 some points. And he was, depending on the poll, of course, you sort of averaging things here. And most voters do not want him to run again. And at the same time, the Republican side of issues polls very well with independents, not that badly with Democrats. Most important of all, the Democrat polls that were taken also said that they were going to get a shellacking. Instead, what they got was what has been called a trickle, if that. They barely hung on to the House, the Republican, or got the House back, and that was because Lee Zeldin, running a great campaign in New York against Kathy Hochul for governor, pulled 4 seats in upstate that were close. Without that, they wouldn't even have the House. And of course, the Senate, they went from 50-50 to 49-51, which is huge in terms of what the other party can do. Because they don't need Kamala to break the tie. And this was bound to be regarded by the White House as an endorsement, which it wasn't. But the fact is that in critical races, it made a difference, that they didn't do what you would normally do here. And that is when you have a president that far underwater, this is the one chance voters have to send a message to the White House, and not only a message, but one that will have to be accepted. And you do that by handing them a shellacking, a red wave, and you give both houses to the Republicans. Whereas in normal routine off-year elections in less partisan times, it wouldn't really matter that much. You could focus on your own candidate quality because party control didn't normally mean that they could just about ram everything through. In those days, there were many Democrats who were more conservative than a lot of the urban Republicans. So it was a much more mixed picture. All right, focus on your own candidate. But the first rule of the hole is to stop digging. And you do that by blocking what the guy has. And maybe it's almost impossible in an off-season election for the Republicans to come forward, or the party out of power to come forward with a coherent program. That's what happens in parliamentary systems. You have a parliamentary leader. And the leader of the Labour Party in Britain, when the Conservatives are in power, and so on. In parliamentary systems, there is a titular leader who can speak for the party. There isn't one in the United States. So it's unreasonable to have a coherent program. But they should be able to say, we agree on one thing. We have to stop the occupant of the Oval Office from inflicting more damage. If they understood this was their one chance, then they had to do that, and they did not do it. And that was a huge mistake. They're already feeling buyer's remorse, but it's a little late. And predictably, Biden is acting like he got a 50-seat majority in the House, trying to. The Republicans have come together more than I thought they could have, but they have very little margin for error. So
Yes.
this was their choice. Go ahead.
Yeah. We seem to have a little bit of a delay with your internet, so if I come across as I'm trying to interrupt you, that is not the case. I may come in a pause, and God knows when it actually goes on air.
Okay.
Now, this is very clear. Now, the Republicans got, for the first time that I can remember in very recent history, an actually majority of people voting for them. almost 3 million votes more than the Democrats, which would be consistent with people having some kind of reaction against the misgovernment of the Biden administration. But that didn't translate into electoral results, which is a peculiarity of our system. I'm not advocating for elimination of the Electoral College, as Democrats would do. On the contrary, but how did the Republican Party manage to transform a wave of voters into a trickle of representatives?
Well, I think I would ordinarily be inclined to say that this is just a quirk of the system. But the fact is that because this situation is so dire, 3 million majority is actually, when you think they have pretty decent turnout, is not that impressive. And of course, it gets swallowed up in a lot of places where they won easily, that sort of thing. What they needed was the kind of thing that told the voters out there, drop everything. We need to sell the White House. This, even in the Senate, the candidate quality always matters more. Well, I heard a whole bunch of those candidates. They weren't bad candidates, and I don't believe they lost because they were skeptical about election results. And they didn't lose because of January 6th was ranked at the bottom concerns. I think there's more at work here to not vote that way. They either wanted to say, let's give Joe another couple of years to see if he can straighten it out. That's one possibility. Or they just voted because if they didn't like Donald Trump or something, this was not the time to send that message. Now is the time for Republicans who don't like Donald Trump to say, and I don't care for his tweets any more than anyone else does. All right, your time has passed, and one or two people have come out and said that. And I think they're right. I also don't think he'll be a candidate, because I think he'll be indicted over January 6th. But the thing is, this was the one chance they got. And if they thought, they just don't think it was that bad. If they thought it was as bad as I think it is, they would have voted straight ticket Republican. Unless, if you have a Nazi or someone like that, but nobody like that was voting. A couple of nutcases who were running and got elected, and we won't talk about who they are or who they are.
Yeah.
But by and large, I mean, you could take Arizona. Why not? In Arizona, they had this is a perfect microcosm, I think. I didn't use it that way in the article, but I think it works very well to go over it. The article is getting long enough as is. They had three races in Arizona. They had their own representative that they were voting for. Then you had a gubernatorial race, and you had a senatorial race. The senatorial race, they had Mark Kelly, the Democrat, who had campaigned saying, I'm going to be an independent in the Senate. And he was not independent. I mean, occasionally on things like, do we want to make it a national holiday for proto-northerly warbler? All right, maybe he defected. But I'm not saying there was exactly such a bill. That's illustrated. But on things that really mattered, he was with them 100% of the time. So he lied to the voters. And then you have, against that, Lake Masters, guy was a financial guy with Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel doesn't hire people who have trouble adding 2 and 2. He was whip smart. If he won the primary in part by saying that the election was stolen, I don't think it was a factor in the general election. I listened to him. He was very intelligent. He had some good issue stands. And against someone like Mark Kelly, I'll give him credit for having been an astronaut, but since then he's been a nebbish. He's done nothing. And Arizonans, we are at now, we'll set aside the issues of what was fraud in that election. It's collateral. Uh, and whether that is what cost Lake Masters and Carrie Lake their chance to win. But then you had the governor's race, you had the gubernatorial race, you had Carrie Lake, who for a decade or two was a star news anchor, very articulate, very well spoken on issues. And against her was running Katie Hobbs, who has trouble putting three sentences together, not for the same reason that certain other people do because of age.
Although I wonder.
Well, the thing is, she was also the Secretary of State. She's running the election that she's running. But she wouldn't debate Carrie Lake because she knew that Carrie Lake would wipe the floor with her.
Right.
Democrats didn't care enough for, again, the won't go into the fraud claims. There was a lot of stuff there that was questionable at minimum. But the point was, it shouldn't even have been close enough. But that should have come up as an issue. And yet, these were two very attractive candidates, up-and-comers. They spoke well on the issues. To say they didn't speak on the issues is false. They spoke on issues, and they spoke very well. And maybe the bottom line is Arizona is a bluer state than we thought. But as a border state, for God's sakes, it's one of the 4 states where people are coming across the border. They're coming across with cartels. The cartels, for God's sakes, they actually have blocked off parts of the border in those states. And each cartel takes a corridor. And they bring their people in. They bring in fentanyl. Enough fentanyl to kill more people than were killed in 11 years, American soldiers in Vietnam. They were killed in 3 years in Korea. And they are bringing in 70-some-thousand killed. It's not an overdose. Fentanyl is so lethal, you never get it. There's no normal safe dose. It's like taking botulinum toxin or something.
Yeah.
They're bringing this across the border. They're running by gangs. These people are indentured servitude. The cartels charge them $2,000. Not out of the goodness of their heart. And no, you don't get that. Get a job at the Target and work for 10 years and pay it off. They want you to help them do things, and you better do it, or you're going to have a much shorter life than you planned on. So all this is going on. The Arizona voters.
And by the way, well, while we are with the cartels, as soon as Biden was inaugurated and we knew what he was going to do at the border, one of the things that I said in one of our shows is he is proposing to transfer $2 to $3 billion a month to Mexican cartels. And he's going to do that through the fees paid by immigrants alone, add to the profit of the drug trade and the prostitution rings and the human smuggling. And this is one of the largest aid packages that the U.S. has given anybody, and the beneficiary happens to be a bunch of criminal organizations in Mexico that are doing tremendous harm in this country. You mentioned in the article that most Americans are not even cognizant of the sheer volume of this. In these 2 years, about 5 million illegals have come in that we know of. Of course, those that get away, we don't count. Some people in the Border Patrol are telling me that the number may be 3 times larger than the Department of Homeland Security hints us. The getaways, that is. So we are giving billions upon billions every month to Mexican cartels, and we have about 5 million that we know of illegal immigrants in this country now, which is beginning to be a significant number of our percentage of our population. That alone, under normal circumstances, should have been enough to create a tidal wave of rejection, but
Well,
it didn't.
when you look at, you add in a number for Godaway. A district is a house district is 750,000 people, and maybe only half the states have more than that in actual population. And to have 6 million gotaways and those who got in, let's say, what you're talking about is equivalent to 8 House seats, 8
Yes,
close worth. And there are places, I think it's in Maine or Vermont, that they want to abolish citizenship as a requirement for voting. So these are huge numbers. And again, if the voters were really scared that things are really spinning out of control, well, at least most of them would have known what to do and they would do it.
yep. It is. I don't know if I have an internet problem or did I lose you?
No, I'm here. I'm just waiting.
Okay,
Stop. So
sorry about that. But
I'm
we're talking about a group larger than the population of Minnesota. We used to talk about the balkanization of America, and now it's beginning to look like the Somalization of America.
well. I'll look at it this way. I think what has changed now. There are two great resets going on. Democratic Great Reset is to import voters who will be grateful that they were let in by the Democrats. They're letting in voters in violation of the what lawyers call a comprehensive statutory scheme. Bipartisan majorities in both houses in the 90s and 80s, and maybe even at the beginning of the aughts. I've lost track of how many statutes there were off the top of my head. Said we don't want economic migrants because we could get 1 billion of them. Back in '74 or so, Kissinger was talking to Deng Xiaoping, 74, 75, in China, and he was complaining about human rights. He said, well, how many of our people do you want? 300 million? And the point
Hmm.
is that the courts have done nothing on this. The issue surely has been raised. This violates everything Biden has done is in violation of the statutory scheme. Economic migrants are not welcome. They were welcome 100 years ago, 200 years ago. America had an insatiable need for labor at all levels, mostly unskilled in those days, but some skill. Now we've got a large pool of people, especially with the pandemic, who haven't gone back to work. They've been given so much money. You've got other pools of people who may not match qualifications, and here you have this stuff coming across the border, but they're not qualified for a lot of these jobs either, and they're being sent all over. There's collusion at the border with the judges. When you have a hearing, these people have to go in and they have to say or file or put on paper that they have a reasonable fear of persecution because of their membership in such and such a group. Now, I guarantee you, left to their own devices, these people all would have said, I come to America for a better life. That's not what the statute says is acceptable. So, what happens is you get these law firms that fill out, give them the magic words to put in, and write it in your own handwriting. I have a reasonable fear of persecution from such and such, and ask for that. And then they're given a hearing date. They go into the interior. They're brought there by a lot of these open borders private groups, and they disappear. You can't really have that.
No, no. In fact, it's in violation of any notion that we may have of refugees or asylees. I'm in fear of persecution by the commander of the Second Army Corps in Rosario, Argentina, but you're coming in from Mexico. And in Mexico, you have no reason to fear anything. That sort of claim would have been rejected out of hand without even waiting for a judge to adjudicate it not too long ago.
Well, it's worse than that. Biden is now allowing them to apply while they're in Mexico and giving them permission to enter before they even get to the border.
Yep,
Uh, yeah, look, there's a lot to worry about in Mexico. The Mexican cartels down there are not building children's hospitals either. On the other hand, they're not being persecuted for any reason other than that they happen to be in the way of the cartels. If you're sitting in the wrong restaurant and they come in, they're not fastidious about who they shoot. As long as they get their main target, if they get a bunch of other people, they don't care.
right.
That kind of
Much like the south side of Chicago, isn't it?
and thing is, that kind of peril is not enough to get in. I don't know. Well, yeah, sure. The South Side of Chicago, they have a reasonable fear that they'll get hit by straight bullets and gangbangers are firing. And nothing is being done. We'll find out in a week. I think there's a primary on the 28th. Whether
Yes.
Chicago elects their, shall we say, governance challenged mayor to nominate for another term. So, but basically, this is a racket that is being run that way, and the Biden people are complicit. They bring enough people in like that, you're going to see a civil war in this country.
Yes. Well, there were many years ago. Somebody was complaining to me about the flow of immigrants to the U.S., and I told them, for as long as our quality of life is so much better than the rest of the world, there is going to be a constant stream of immigrants trying to get into this country, and many we actually need. If you want to stop that flow, the only solution is to make the quality of life in the US lower than that of these countries, and then they will have no incentive. And it seems like current policies aim at achieving precisely that goal.
Well, some of them, it looks that way. Never attribute to conspiracy what you can attribute to blunder. My normal, my normal.
Yes,
But it does seem we had the CDC. The head of CDC was Rochelle Walensky testify in front of Congress. She was asked if there was an end to mass. She couldn't offer one. And I mean, Trump's greatest achievement, I think, was that by allowing the states to go their own way, which Hillary would never have done, we avoided a health policy dictatorship. Because after a year or two, you could go into the courts and say, listen, the emergency's passed. People aren't dropping in the streets. We're on planes and we're able to do things. And the administration, they can prove it by saying, look at Florida compared to New York. Look at Texas compared to Pennsylvania. Look at Oregon, look at Portland compared to Baltimore. Stuff. Go in there and say, look, we're not dropping in the streets. And Florida has a lot of elderly people, the second largest, I think, after California or New York. And they're not. So you could go to it as they did. They went to a Trump judge and then they took it up on appeal and said, look, there's no emergency anymore. And it was so obviously the case that the Biden people are continuing the litigation to say, we want to make sure we have the power for next time. We'll see what the courts do. They should dismiss it because it's asking the court for what lawyers call an advisory opinion ahead of any case or controversy where there is another pandemic or something going on. And so, Trump saved us from that. If Hillary had been in, she would have imposed a lockdown mandate on everyone. She wouldn't have. She might still be in it, and there'd be no way to get out of it because she wouldn't be able to go to court with evidence. Go ahead.
oh, sorry about that. Like I said, I'm having the weirdest internet connection in that. And by the way, between you and me, not to get too technical, the numbers are fine, but we are not. It appears that on the streaming channels, it is coming out fine. So it's more of a monitoring issue for me. We'll try to wing it. But you are absolutely correct. If somebody like Biden or Hillary or Obama had been in charge during 2019, 2020, would still be wearing masks, for forbidden to go to the beach, and ordering takeout from some government office, because there wouldn't be any restaurant left by now.
There's something, yeah, that's right. They're all short staffed. But there's something else. We've seen it in the last 2 weeks. So I'll be 76 in 3 months. I have never seen anything like this in my life. From my first sentient moment of Sputnik when I was 10 to now, I've never seen it. You have this horrific derailment in East Palestine, Chicago, Palestine, 2 weeks ago now almost.
Ohio, in East Palestine, Ohio, right?
And the uh, you have toxic fumes that the government created by its decision because they weren't prepared, they didn't know what to do, which releases, among other things, a gas phosgene that was used as a weapon of war in World War One. You have
Yep.
people who are reporting all sorts of symptoms of kinds of sicknesses, infections, sores, scars, terrible stuff. And they asked Sherrod Brown, somebody asked Sherrod Brown a couple of days ago, a senior senator from Ohio, a Democrat, would you drink the water? He ducked the question. And that's not lost on the locals. I've never seen open indifference. The president decided to go to Ukraine. If he wanted to do it another occasion, it would have been fine also if he had done something more than make promises that are nowhere near enough if they wanted to have a chance to win
Yep.
that. But this week, any president, Bill Clinton would have been out there in a day or two. Bill Clinton understood that. Obama was somewhat remote, but this is another category. It's Joe's advisors. Said you have to go, and if not, send somebody really senior. Nobody wants to send Kamala because she'll cackle all over the place. But Buttigieg, he has missed every major crisis. From when he took paternity leave with his husband, when the supply chain crisis broke, I think it was in 2021. And,
Yes.
then meanwhile, Biden's at Rehoboth Beach soaking up the sun, and Buttigieg sees no reason why I should go out there. But initially, FEMA says we don't cover things like this, when in fact they do. And then Buttigieg pulls a rabbit out of a hat and says, oh, but we were supposed to get new pneumatic brakes on these trains, and Trump blocked it. Well, the fact of the matter is they did. They only were to be used on cargo trains with 100% of hazardous cargo. This was a mixed cargo. Now you could argue, and I wouldn't argue against it. If you're carrying even one car that has this stuff, you should have that extra thing. But that's not what the law was. And here we have 1,000 train derailments a year.
Yep.
Look at our flight. We have third world system. And here we've spent so much in infrastructure. I was reading, we haven't wasted so much money without building new infrastructure. I was reading articles in the mid-1980s, maybe even the 70s, about our dilapidated infrastructure. And had we set aside 50 or 100 billion a year, we would have a first-class infrastructure now. And we wasted several billion in the pandemic. Some of it hasn't even been spent. And
I would say way more than several billion.
trillions. several trillion,
Trillion. Yes.
and, and sorry about that. And a lot of that went to people to pay them not to work more than they needed to be. You know, a lot of it went where
Yes.
Obama did with his $800 billion infrastructure bill in his first couple of months of August, which was of office, when he said it was going to shovel-ready projects, and we learned
Uh,
later not one of them
yes.
was shovel-ready. So,
Well, but you see, the problem is that you don't need shovels to fix railway signaling.
well, that's true, but you also need tracks. And
No,
uh,
I know, I know. I'm trying to be facetious. It couldn't possibly be a shovel-ready project if you don't use shovels.
well,
You are absolutely correct. We have an obsolete system
derailment every
in
8 hours. Every 8 hours, we have a derailment in this country.
yes, yes, and it is mostly due to lack of maintenance and degrading
Yeah,
of the rails,
exactly.
and we also have an overburdened rail system. When the first thing that the Biden administration did was cancel the XL pipeline, it just favored the use of 13,000 rail cars to transport that oil instead, because transporting it is, but not on a pipeline, on railroads. And then of course we had what you just referenced, the supply line crisis that the government did absolutely nothing except ensure that drivers didn't show up for work. And all of a sudden, you have much of what used to be trucked around being tagged on to trains that I don't know if it's happened to you, but it's happened to me of seeing a 3 mile long train take a good half an hour, 45 minutes to cross while I wait looking at it. They're longer, they're heavier than they ever were, as the rail system itself is more and more degraded. We are asking for catastrophes coming our way in numbers that we can only imagine.
Yes, and yet the voters seeing this picture unfold, are the voters next time going to say this is the last straw? I wouldn't bet on it. We're a year and a half away, a year and 3 quarters from the election. And by then, this is going to be as ancient history as the fall of the Western
Oh,
Roman
yes. Yes, nobody will remember this event.
But we've seen also when you have a competent governor, what happens? This thing with Ian last fall, this borderline hurricane, it was a catastrophe in Florida, and in 2 weeks he had everything up and running because he was prepared. And
Yes,
we don't see this in many places. And
no, and I have to say, I got to see firsthand the destruction around Fort Myers and Naples,
yeah,
and this was a war zone. Of course, the press didn't report much on it, uh, but within 2 weeks, highways were reopened, bridges were bridged, and things were coming to normal. And 2 months later, it was almost practically back to normal.
that's astonishing because I remember those pictures. I know people who live in that area who survived. I'm glad to say. But again, what we have is had staggering incompetence of a kind. We have a government that can't get out of its own way. It's so huge.
Yes,
And that's monumentally corrupt. Newt Gingrich had an article about third uh, world level of corruption coming here. And yet the voters did not feel in this last election that they needed to send a message to change course to the White House. And
yep,
that should scare Republicans, no matter who they are. They should be really scared of that.
yep. It, There were a couple of instances in Georgia, definitely, and in New Mexico, where the same voters that elected somewhat comfortably a Republican governor sent back to Congress an abomination. Uh, somebody who is both corrupt, cretiноusly so. How
So,
did that happen? How can the people of Georgia elect Kemp and send back to Congress this slumlord? Uh,
well, slumlord is unbelievable.
I'm being gentle.
Yeah, I know, but the thing is, that's one where they did have a weak candidate. Herschel Walker may be a fine human being. He may have some good small business going. He had no business being the candidate. But you had, on the other hand, the other guy that was elected back in 2000, Ossoff. He got elected in part because the Libertarians siphoned off 2% of the vote, and that's how Perdue was forced into a runoff. David Perdue, or he would have won.
Yeah.
But
By the way, I was talking about Warnock, but Ossa is another one that I never understood how he came to be elected.
well,
Uh,
he came to
uh, uh,
the
a guy
media.
who forgot to disclose he was getting a salary check from the Chinese Communist Party.
But the thing is that he and both of them are far left radicals who are portrayed as moderates by the Democrat media, which is 90% of the media. But again, if you look at this, the bottom line for me is that the voters should have looked at this and said, this is our one chance to tell that fellow in the White House, change course, and tell the Democrats in the Senate
Mm.
and the House, change course, and send a message that would have forced them to consider that. They didn't do it. And so naturally, the Democrats are doubling down on all those destructive policies.
Yep. And you mentioned in your article that giving that extra senator to the Democrats is going to ensure the confirmation of radical judges after the of Ketanji Brown. And I think we've already gone farther than that. The administration is so confident. They've actually presenting judges that have no idea what Article 2, 3, 5 of the Constitution do.
Ketanji doesn't know whether she's a biological woman. I wonder if she told that to the White House that she might not fit the criteria. But the scary part to me, for all of this stuff about Kirsten Cinema and Manchin, they should have looked at that and said, all they had to do was say, no, not someone like this. And I don't know whether anybody tried to go to the White House. So you have Michelle Childs. So far as I know, she's left wing but not radical. She's from South Carolina. She's well regarded. If she'd been nominated, she would have been confirmed 80 to 20, probably. Go up, so we'll
Mm.
give you easy confirmation, but we're not letting this one through. This is somebody who has a pattern of leniency in child molestation cases. And there was more the White House was sitting on, apparently. How could you put
Yep.
anybody like that on any court? It's simply beyond me. But they did. Democrats hung together. And if they had not hung together, if you had said, hey, this is too much, it would have been spared.
Now, there was a time where moderates, if there is any left in the Democratic Party, would have exerted some pressure to keep a more centered ship. But I don't see any evidence that there is anyone left.
We are at this point on a ship that, if it hasn't already hit the iceberg, we are very close. And you know, this is the last election. This really is it. If we don't get this, it'll be too late because you have, in order to reverse a bad presidency, you need at least, if you have a one-term president, you need at least 2 terms. Ronald Reagan got rid of most of the bad things Jimmy Carter did, but not all of them. You get 2 terms. You don't need. You can't do that in 2 terms. You need 4 or 5 terms. You need at least 16 to 20 years, and all the judges is going to put on are going to nullify the Trump judges. They're going to sit there for a long time.
Yep.
So this was a catastrophic thing, and above all, the Republicans take as their chair of RNC a 3-time loser instead of trying somebody else. So
Yes, indeed. And uh, I still have my monitoring problems here, but yeah, I think I don't think we've hit the iceberg yet, but I think we are damn close. And it appears to me, I know everybody says this on every election because they need to want people to go and vote. This is the most important election in your lifetime. They're getting to be. They are getting to be. Do we want a country? Thomas Paine once said when it was proposed that we had a monarchy and pick a European prince, uh, he said something to the effect that if we must crown anybody, let us crown the Constitution, that the world may know that in America thou is king. Well, not anymore. There's been a, a, a revolution and the law is being dethroned. And we have all kinds of ridiculous situations from San Francisco to New York, from Minnesota to Georgia, where the most basic principles of law are not being followed. We no longer have equality under the law. Our legal rights are no longer respected, and criminals get to walk free
there is, and
by design.
this is we're getting to the point where that ever becomes fully accepted as a new normal. The Republic's finished. I mean, it was a foggy night when the Titanic hit the iceberg. We're in fog
Yep,
now. We're steaming
yep,
ahead, and therefore, I don't know whether how close we are to the iceberg. Are we a mile away, 10 miles away? Do we have time to turn at the last minute, or will we have a gash in the side? In the case of the Titanic, the gash went 6 compartments. If it had gone only 5, the ship would have survived. That's how narrow the margin was. And of course, they were 1,500 lifeboats short. They had plenty of room for them.
yes. Eh,
So that's why I took the metaphor, because I don't think anybody can know. I'm not confident that we haven't already hit the iceberg.
yep.
Um, but I am confident that if we still have time and we don't make the most of it next time, that's going to be it. The Republic will turn 250, and in America will turn 250 in 2026. There won't be anything to celebrate. The
No.
decline will be irreversible. It's like, think of a building that's pancaking. You start out, the building is a skyscraper 100 stories tall, and it starts to pancake, and it picks up speed. And at some point, I would say, just guessing, it may vary from material to material. You get a quarter of the way or a third of the way down, the combination of weight and speed becomes such that it's unstoppable. We have
Yes.
started, and I wrote about that in 2020 with what was happening that summer, and that uh, once we get past that point, it's the point of no return.
It is an interesting question. Maybe next time we'll look back on this and see how close we were to that iceberg. But you're correct. I mean, maybe we already hit it, and the question is how many compartments are affected. Uh,
Yeah.
all I know is that a country that cannot control its borders. This is something, by the way, that Kemal Ataturk said, uh, essentially making fun of Woodrow Wilson, who was very much attuned to what's going on today in America. And Ataturk said, "Poor Wilson. He doesn't realize that a country that does not defend its borders by the bayonet, if necessary, can no longer survive."
Well, I
We're
think,
not doing that.
well, the thing is, back then, though, we got into World War One. Wilson was reelected, saying he kept us out of war because of the Zimmerman telegram that came from the foreign minister of Germany and was sent to Mexico, foreign minister saying, if you help us in the war afterwards, we'll give you back the possessions you lost to the Americans. And
Yeah,
that's what actually got us. But America then was an Old Testament country, and they weren't going to stand for that. Wilson had no choice at that point. Nowadays, we're not even a New Testament country, we're a No Testament country. And I don't know if there's enough people left who will make a difference at the ballot box and reverse this. I don't think anybody can know.
maybe we're a country writing our own will and testament.
Yeah, we're that close.
It's we are that close. We should consider that possibility. Um, of course, we have managed to go 50 minutes without mentioning Ukraine, which I think is quite a record these days.
Well, Ukraine, look, Ukraine is a huge issue. And Russia, without Ukraine, is not an empire, as Carter's national security advisor, who was a lot better than his boss, uh, uh, Brzezinski
Yeah,
said.
Szczecinski, right?
Yeah, Brzezinski, yeah. The point is, we are met on the battlefield there, and we have no choice. And anything less than victory means that they'll be turning next to other places to annex. And Biden is talking the talk, but he's not walking the walk. Giving him tanks in a year and a half isn't going to do any good. We have there are 2,200 Leopard tanks in Europe, 500
Yes.
Abrams. If you're going to do it, give it to them and tell them, you got a year to win it. And meanwhile, you start up the defense industrial base, which has shrunk
Yes.
drastically.
And I believe we have 1,500 F-16s in Europe. Certainly, we can spare a couple of hundred.
Well, we could do that. The question is, it's easier to train them on MiGs because they.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. But you know that the Brits have been training them on
Oh,
F-16s for a while now.
and the F-16 will shoot anything out of the sky that the other side has. One of the things, and one of the reasons why, and I wrote this in an article in October, Putin is not going to use a nuke, is because it would be seen as an act of desperation. Whereas if he had used it a year ago, a few weeks in before NATO woke up and Zelensky did his imitation of Churchill, it might have worked, shock and awe. But now they've seen how their military equipment, how many ways they're being beat. And the worst job in the world in international arms sales would be if you were representing the Russians to try and sell to other countries and all your income is on commission. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck on that one, indeed. I don't think Su-25s are selling that well lately.
Well, they still use their old equipment. I noticed there were 8 Russian planes that violated our airspace in Alaska. One of them was a Bear bomber. That bomber was a turboprop that was built in the 1950s, for God's sake.
Well, they're using tanks from the 50s now in Ukraine. I think that what many of us have always said, that the Russian army was essentially a joke, is now becoming apparent. Now, going to the nuclear use, in your article almost a year ago, or at least several months ago,
late
you
October
could
for the election.
late October, you essentially say that no one man can give the order in the U.S. or Russia,
That's right.
and that is true. I used to put it in different ways in my programs. If Putin were to give that order in Russia, he would be breathing his last breath at the same time.
Quite
Uh,
probably. The other matter is, if he could do it on his own, the best evidence that he doesn't have the ability to do that is he didn't do it, 10 months ago, which he would have.
exactly. And I don't know if you noticed, but since November, he's been walking it back with almost desperation. Well, of course, I wasn't serious about Russia will only use nuclear weapons in self-defense. Will never use them aggressively, etc., etc. And I'm having the impression that he's had the quiet talk with people around him, which essentially told them to cool it on this one.
Well, he's back and forth on it, but I think he has been told in private, probably, we didn't sign up for this. He went ahead and did this without clearing it with a lot of people in the Kremlin that he normally would have informed. They didn't sign on for this, and they know they'll have to look with the consequences of it long after he kicks the bucket.
Yep.
So they're not going to use it, but Joe Biden may be too scared to give them what they need to win. And that would be a great tragedy. In the meantime, he's going to
Or too confused.
Putin. Yeah, well, Putin is not confused. He
No.
believes that the country stripped bare. There's going to be nothing left. It'll be a completely Pyrrhic victory. They could still push them out. If they had tanks and air, they could do an assault. The troops are poorly trained. They have no morale. And they're apparently, well, the Europeans are at least pushing a lot harder, but I don't think it's
Yes.
enough. And
No, no. The Europeans are pushing a lot harder than we are, and they are perfectly clear that under no circumstances can Russian tanks reach the Polish border.
oh,
They
absolutely.
know this. They know this. They feel it in their bones, and they will do whatever is necessary, send whatever is necessary,
Well,
within the NATO framework or out if need be.
well, the former Warsaw Pact nations are the ones who are saying we know what it's like to be under Russian rule. We don't want it again. That's for sure. And they understand that Ukraine is the heart of Europe, as well as being the breadbasket of Europe. It is
Yes,
the heart of Europe. It is
and
more
and
it is more significant than West Germany in the Cold War.
absolutely, absolutely. From a geopolitical standpoint, Ukraine is decisive.
Yes.
And you say that the breadbasket, uh, Ukraine's grain production added to Russian GDP would actually turn Russia into a relatively powerful nation, from an exporter of a commodity to the guys who control food prices in Europe and Africa.
Yep.
Nobody wants that except for Putin. I think that Europe is going to continue to push the US. The Biden administration is coming into this late and willingly every step of the way. At the beginning, they were concerned with getting Russian aid for a new Iran deal than anything that might happen to Ukraine. That ship sailed,
Well,
and now they are essentially following NATO leadership on this one.
but they still have fantasies on this. Think about it.
Oh yes,
Biden last spring called Putin a war criminal. Kamala Harris said so a few days ago. Now, I don't disagree. I don't think there's anybody who thinks that he isn't a war criminal except him and a few of his buddies. But you're going to call somebody a war criminal. What's his incentive to compromise when afterwards they're going to want to put him on trial somewhere?
right. And we know that Zelensky is already put in motion the mechanisms in The Hague, and Ukrainians are, as they well should be, adamant that there have to be war crime tribunals.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, making it public like that, it's when you get a chance.
It forecloses any other option.
Well, but the thing is, that's what you can say when you've won. It isn't won
Hmm.
yet.
I agree.
Now,
I agree with you on this one. This is the kind of thing you say when you won, uh, and the reason why is it closes every other door.
yes.
Uh, but maybe, if I were Ukrainian, I wouldn't want to leave a door open for NATO or the US to squirm through.
Well, the point is that the NATO countries understand. Look, when Sweden and Finland want to join, they're being blocked by Erdogan, uh, but of Turkey. But when they want to join, they are pushing real hard too, and
Oh,
they
yes.
they see what's going on, and they're saying this could be us if we don't stop it here. They just
Yep.
all keep pushing Biden and say, all right, talk the talk, now walk the walk. Yet they don't really need our tanks. What they need are our aircraft and our longer range, highly accurate missiles. And you say, look, don't shoot these things at civilian targets. You can shoot at supply depot, bases, stuff like that, a few hundred miles in. Nobody's talking about firing a shot at Moscow.
No.
So you can say you get them, and here's the protocol. But he's got to move.
But he's got to move, and he's got to move now. Because right now, the so cackled Russian offensive is already faltering. Uh, God, Volodar
Well, it's
is quite an
faltering.
example of what not to do.
It's faltering in part because they have almost no Russians fighting. Nobody
Yep.
in Russia is signing up for this. They're pulling these in from all of those various former republics, and every one of them hates the Russians,
Yes.
which is not understood in the West. They think that racism is something only in the United States and the Western countries.
No.
The Russians are virulently racist, and this is the way Russians have fought for 1,000 years. And now you're seeing it on screen.
Yes.
You know, what
Anyway,
about Berlin? They got to Berlin in 1945. They did all this too.
yeah. But by the way, they got to Berlin in '45 with abundant help from the West, and at the cost of 20 million.
Well, look,
Just imagine, to defeat an invading force of 2.5 million, they lost 20 million in wave after wave after wave.
yes, and at the
And
same,
that's about the only way they know how to fight.
yes, but the thing was, then they could do it because the motherland had been invaded. But the
Yes.
problem was that Eisenhower made the tragic decision, which he did because the British had borne the brunt of the war until 1944, while we slept, and then when we didn't really get going for a couple of years. We made progress, but we weren't in full gear. But Montgomery was one of those he wanted to have an overwhelming advantage. Of course, he also gave the British operation, the Allies' Operation Market Garden, which delayed matters another couple months. If Patton had gotten the gas, he would have been passed there. He certainly could have liberated Berlin. He could have liberated
Oh,
Czechoslovakia.
yes.
And,
There would have been no Eastern European countries
uh, and
occupied by the Soviet Union.
that was a tragedy of immense proportions. So we never learn lessons. It seems we keep repeating mistakes. Let's hope that this time we beat the odds and actually do the right thing.
And on that note, let's hope so. And I'll see you some other time to either pick up on this or go into new territory as the elections approach. And thank you so much for our viewers. Please remember to support the Institute if you can. John's work in DC is amazing. You're just getting a glimpse of it. You can follow his articles and his interviews by going to the Gold Institute website. And right there on the screen and on the description below, you have the donor box link to contribute to the extent allowed by our taxman, free of taxes, and help us continue our work. And John, I'm going to give you the last word, and I'll see you soon.
Where it is, it's always a pleasure to be with you and your audience, and I look forward to doing something like this in the not too distant future.
Thank you, thank you so much, and I'll be calling you. I have a few more questions. Uh, Take care.
Okay. All right. Bye. So, so